Everything that Max Verstappen did on Friday and Saturday in terms of those long runs that we talked about, that we focused, that we highlighted on these two videos from Friday and Saturday, paid off on race day. He went into the Grand Prix, basically the only driver with any real knowledge of what the soft tyre and the medium tyre were going to be like in various fuel loads, various track conditions, and indeed when it started to go off, or if things changed, how he would need to adapt his style. It's one thing to say tyre management, good tyre management, and the degradation in general on Sunday at Monza was quite low. All credit to Pirelli for that. But it's quite another to know, because you've done it already, how to react to what is going on around you. And that's exactly what Max Verstappen had. He had the confidence of starting on the soft tyre and pushing that right through to lap 23. And such was his pace from P7 relative to Charles Leclerc that, again, we saw an open wound in the side of the Ferrari team coming under the heading of strategy. As I said before, quite clearly over the August break, they had a big sit down and Charles Leclerc and the strategy team and Matteo Binotto got together. And the upshot was, okay, Charles, from now on, we'll involve you in all the calls, make sure that you're comfortable with everything we're going to do, which is all right if you're going for a London-Brighton run, taking 7 hours, 46 minutes or something. But in the middle of a fast-paced Grand Prix, it is completely ridiculous to have to get everything verified by your driver. What Charles Leclerc needs is what Red Bull give Max Verstappen, and to some extent, what Mercedes give to Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. I say to some extent because obviously we've seen a few holes in the Mercedes armour as well. But in general, a racing driver in the peak of the moment, in the middle of a Grand Prix, lap 14, lap times going off slightly, doesn't need to be asked, what do you think we should do next, Charles? We've got 14 different options. Which one should we go for? There needs to be a very clear understanding of what's going to happen based on the amount of homework they've done. And that's why Ferrari went into this race with plan A, plan B, plan C, because they didn't actually have enough knowledge to focus on plan A, nothing else. And that's what Red Bull did, of course, relative to Ferrari. You can see that now. They just honed in on what was the winning strategy for tyres. They weren't in any way sucked into coming in for mediums early. They stuck to their plan. They knew how long Max could go on the soft tyre, which was 23, 24 laps. And then, of course, he went in for a free pit stop later on for soft tyres. Afterwards, I think it was very easy to go up to 30,000 feet and just see Daniel Ricciardo pulling to the side of the track. It would be ludicrous to say that Ferrari were robbed, that Charles Leclerc was robbed, bearing in mind also that Max had done so much homework and had spent so little time trying to get a quick time on soft tyres in FP1, FP2 and FP3. And at the restart, he was on a brand new set of softs, whereas Charles in the Ferrari, and they'd spent a lot of time trying to put a quick lap together to ensure that he did get the pole in front of the home crowd, a little bit like Miami, this one, I think, didn't have a new set of tyres when he needed it at the end of the race. As it happened, it was a moot point, as I say, because the race did finish behind the safety car, but it would have been Max on new tyres against Charles on scrubbed softs, and it would have been no contest whatsoever. But I think from the Ferrari media, fan, polarised Formula One point of view, there's going to be quite a lot of talk about this. The race should have been finished as a race, and maybe Charles could have pushed Max into an error on the final lap or something like that. There'll be lots of talk like that. And I think that's a shame, because the reality is it was Max Verstappen's day and it was Red Bull's Grand Prix from the start of Friday practice and the amount of work they did over the next 3 sessions. I said yesterday that the potential for Max to win this one was going to be very much based on how he went over the first lap, or maybe 2 laps, the potential to have front wing end plate damage at the first or second chicane. And it was a little bit like that. Lando Norris very slow off the line. Of course, Max was behind the McLaren, but beautiful aggressive move, just boom, straight past him like that. But then down into the first corner, you could almost see his brain working, saying, okay, I've got that position, take it easy, give people room, don't crowd anybody. And he was just going through beautifully, showing all the patience in the world, which is exactly what he did at Spa as well. And then once the race had started to get into its rhythm, it was a simple matter of getting into a draft, using the DRS, and then on the new set of soft tyres, just blasting past anybody who's in front of him under braking for the first chicane. By lap 5, he was up to P2, and then obviously it was just going to be a race against Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari and how well they would go on that soft tyre into the race, and what Max was doing in the Red Bull. And you could hear, whenever we were on board with Max, you could hear him lift and coast. You could hear him braking early. You could do all the things. You could hear him doing all the things that were just going to make those tyres and the fuel and the engine last for almost as long as they needed to. And sure enough, on lap 12, when a virtual safety car came out, when Sebastian Vettel pulled to one side in the Aston Martin and ground to a halt, Ferrari took this opportunity to bring Charles Leclerc in, or shall I say, to have another conversation with Charles about what they should do, plan A, B or C or D or F or whatever it was. And so he came in and went on to the medium tyre. And that's because at that point, Ferrari, as I say, were plunging into the unknown. They'd never done that many laps on the soft tyre with that sort of fuel load. And of course, it all came to a head right at the end when Daniel Ricciardo stopped, as I say, the engine silent on the McLaren, and both drivers had free pit stops. Charles had a discussion with his team about whether he could stay out and maybe gain track position, but then came the bad news, which is that because of the virtual safety car and then safety car, there was no way in the world he would gain track position. Max could come in, have a free pit stop and not lose the lead, and that's exactly what happened. And it was for a new set of softs as well, because he hadn't run as many going into qualifying as Charles Leclerc. So in every dimension, wherever you look at it, however you look at this race, the only thing that was really going to damage Max Verstappen's chances was, as I said yesterday, going to be whether or not he could get through the first couple of laps cleanly without damaging the car. And he did that beautifully. He did that with incredible patience, just knowing when to push, when to shove, when to hold back, when to let another driver go, when to be on the outside, when to be on the inside. It was all very Lewis Hamilton-like and, dare I say, totally professional. The only thing that was unprofessional, as I say, was allowing the situation to get out of control and out of hand at the end of the race with the booing into the microphone when he was being interviewed and then on the podium as well. And I think that's a very bad thing for Formula One, because that podium shot of the winner is shown throughout the world. That is what goes out on what they call the unilaterals. And for that to go out with that booing in the background, I can't imagine anybody in Formula One thinks that's good for the sport. Maybe they do. Maybe they think, oh, this polarization, this hatred is really good because you've got to have people that love Max and hate Max. Personally, I think that argument is almost under the heading of sick. But anyway, let's look at some of the other results. George Russell, very, very good drive into third place. There was a bit of a skirmish off the line because he made a really good start from P2. Charles did too, but they were alongside one another, and George was on the left going into the first chicane and pushing Charles, as you know he would, under braking right down into the apex of that first right-hander on the outside. And Charles, as he was always going to, used all the road as he got to the middle of the track, in which George then had to turn the wheel to the left and to avoid him, and went through the chicane and then rejoined in P2. And there was a bit of talk about, yeah, he had him off, but there was no way in the world that I think Charles was going to get a penalty. What can I say? Ferrari driver, first lap, racing incident. Anyway, I thought it was quite funny in the green room after the race, after the interviews before the podium, when that incident came on the big screen TV and George is looking at it and he says, oh, I gave you a lot of room there, didn't you, Charles? And Charles sort of looked at him a little bit like the Lewis Hamilton thing a few years ago when he won, 2019 was it, going into the second chicane. Yeah, what do you mean? Well, oh, yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, and they had a bit of a laugh. But yeah, I thought George did very well there. He also started on the soft, so he had the two front row guys on the soft. But they put him on the hard tyre. He did a good long stint on the soft and drove really well on that. And they put him on the hard, which I suppose comes under the heading of, well, let's try something different because we're going to be P3 here probably. We might as well see whether the hard is a great tyre and maybe the medium's not as good, or maybe they got to come in with high deg. But it didn't work out that way. The deg was quite low. The hard tyre wasn't brilliantly quick. And George was, from 2/3 of the way through the race, was kind of stranded in P3, not able to do very much. He was never really under threat from Carlos Sainz. He drove really well from the back of the grid. But, of course, he would have been, George that is, very, very relieved to have got onto a set of soft tyres right at the end when these free pit stops came up with the safety car. But, of course, he couldn't put them into any sort of action and crossed the line, cruised across the line to finish third. Carlos Sainz, as I say, really good from the back of the grid. It was a sort of mini race between him and Lewis Hamilton, and Carlos won that. No real surprise there. The Ferrari is a quicker car around Monza than the Mercedes, and Carlos drove really well on that opening stint on the medium tyre, made it last for 30 laps, and he was still pretty competitive by lap 29 and finished a very good P4. Lewis was fifth, and in a way I'm kind of glad that the race didn't restart, because Yes, Lewis was finally on soft. You can imagine that when they put those on, he'd done that long first stint, just like Carlos Sainz on the medium tyre. When they finally put him onto softs, you can imagine Lewis saying, yes, I'm finally racing on softs, or words to that effect. But of course, then they still managed to get it wrong, because had that race restarted, everybody around Lewis, apart from Sergio Perez, whose soft tyres were only 6 laps old when Ricciardo stopped and he stayed out, his tyres were 6 laps old. Everybody else was on either new or scrubbed softs with no laps on them. Whereas Lewis, had they restarted the race, would have been on softs that had done 16 laps. And I can hear it now on the radio. Why am I the only guy who's got double figure laps on my soft tyre? So that was a little bit lucky, I think, for Mercedes and Lewis, because Lando on that new scrub set of softs might have got Lewis. He probably wouldn't, but, you know, 1 lap scrubbed softs against 16 lap old softs. It could have been an interesting race in the last couple of laps. So Sergio Perez finished 6th for Red Bull behind Lewis. They brought him in very early to switch from medium to hard tyres. That was an imaginative strategy as well, I guess you could say. And he did pretty well on that hard tyre, made it last a long time, but inevitably he was always going to have to stop. If he'd run 6 laps longer, of course, he could have come in for a free pit stop and might well have finished 5th as a result. But it was sod's law. He came in for softs, and then 6 laps later, Daniel Ricciardo stopped and Sergio stayed out there. But a good result for him, I guess you could say, from where he started on the grid. Lando, as I say, made a very slow start, which meant that Daniel Ricciardo's big moment had arrived, and he did really well in the early laps in the first phase of the race on the medium tyre. He had a big group of cars behind him, Pierre Gasly, Fernando Alonso, Lando, Guanyu Zhou as well, and coming through that quite quickly, Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. But through it all, Daniel didn't give any ground to Pierre Gasly at all. The 2 last winners of the Italian Grand Prix, if you like, sizing one another up. The AlphaTauri, as we said yesterday, quicker in a straight line, that McLaren definitely had the exit speed from corners like the Lesmos, Ascari, and of course the Parabolica. So Daniel was going really well, but McLaren surprisingly brought him in as early as lap 19 on the medium tyres. Now bear in mind that Lando Norris, also on the mediums, went through to lap 35. That was a really early call. They put him on the hard tyre then. It was quite a tough race for him on the hard, a little bit like George Russell. And in the end, Daniel retired, as I say. But Lando Norris had hung back, looked after his tyres really well, great tyre management, and picked up places as that long run on the medium tyre developed, and then came in for soft tyres at exactly the right moment and picked up pace as the race went on. He, as I say, he might have been in a position to put Lewis under a bit of pressure had the race restarted. He was on a new set of softs right at the end. But a good drive by Lando Norris again, and a rather frustrating day, you could say, for Daniel Ricciardo, but he did prove a bit of a point. He's still got some of that pace there that we know and love about Daniel. Pierre Gasly, I think, wrung everything he could at that AlphaTauri. As I say, it was quick in a straight line, but pretty horrific around in terms of traction, braking, and medium and high-speed downforce levels. He used all his skill to finish in what was eventually P8, ran medium, longish stint on the medium, then a very, very long stint on the hard, and refrained from coming in for soft tyres right at the end. Rather strange, really, because I can't imagine he would have lost a lot of ground, and you would have thought by then they'd want to give him a bit of a breather and put him on soft tyres. But they didn't do that with Esteban Ocon or Guanyu Zhou either, so rather strange decision making there. I suppose that was a question of who was going to blink first, and if one of them did, the others would have come in, because they were pretty close on the road. So Pierre Gasly finished 8th, but he was under a lot of pressure for a lot of the race from, would you believe, Nick de Vries standing in for Alex Albon in the Williams. I'm not quite sure what Alex would have been thinking watching this race, thinking, typical, finally the car's great, and here am I with appendicitis, and let's hope he gets better very soon. Or he could be thinking, yikes, this guy's done a really, really good job. We haven't seen a Williams go this well for a long time. And no surprise that by the fans who watch Formula One, Nick de Vries was voted driver of the day. So we had a Dutchman winning the Grand Prix, and we had another one voted driver of the day. And he did do a really good job, Nick de Vries. He looked polished. He looked on top of what was happening. Yes, he was on medium tyres when he was racing with others on hards, but he made them last. And he got the best from the Williams, which isn't, of course, the world's greatest racing car. It is quick in a straight line like the AlphaTauri. And it probably has slightly better downforce. But as I say, a Williams has never looked this good all year. And Nick de Vries did it. So all credit to him. And he got a championship point for the team, finished 9th, and I think well deserving of that status, driver of the day, so good on you, Nick. And finally, in P10, Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo. Quite a while since we've seen an Alfa in the points, up there racing in the midfield, doing a very good job. Valtteri Bottas finished P13, but when you think back to Silverstone and that big shunt he had, he recovered from that very well, and he's continuing to mature and to show a lot of flair as well as polish, and he drove very well today at Monza. Other significant races, Fernando Alonso was looking pretty good, probably to be racing Lando Norris very hard towards the end, but retired with something in the power unit. First of all, he complained about it. They said the car looks perfect from where they were in the garage, but then, of course, it did grind to a halt, and they brought him into the pit lane. So he was a retirement. That was unfortunate for Fernando, but a good drive, I thought, by Mick Schumacher, who finished eventually P12. He had a terrible weekend, terrible qualifying, but finished 12th and did a lot of good racing, good passing. And I think, again, underlined that he does have a lot of talent, and it'd be a shame if we're not going to see Mick in Formula One next year. So, another great win for Max Verstappen. That's 5 in a row. He must be, everything happened in slow motion for Max today, didn't it? Everything. Whether it was the start, whether it was the first corner, the second chicane, whether it was how he's going to manage the soft tyre, whether it was worrying about whether or not they'd made the right decision when Charles came in for mediums, should they be countering that and doing the same thing? That's what normally you would see. And they just stuck to it. And they stuck to it because they did all that homework. And they did all that homework because they could focus on a car that felt pretty good from the minute he went out of the pit lane. Everybody else, of course, would have tried to have done the same focus on homework had their cars felt as good out of the box. But as it was, Ferrari were playing around with ride heights, this amount of bottoming, that amount of bottoming, this amount of downforce, this amount of top speed. Red Bull just had it perfect from the second Max left the pit lane. And that's the difference. So it's not a question of they're more dedicated. It's not a question of better tyre management. It's actually a question of a much better chassis and power unit package complete. And that was what won the Italian Grand Prix in the hands of the world champion, Max Verstappen. The ending today is of another great Formula One car, also built in the United Kingdom. No, just pure coincidence it happens to be, but it was the day that Stirling Moss won the Italian Grand Prix in front of the Italian crowds, driving the green Vanwall. It was 1957.